If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe. It is very clear that the church is doing everything it can to appease Rome and to hold the Jews uniquely culpable for Jesus' crucifixion.
Hi, my name is Janet. I'm calling from Southern California. My question is, as far as the supposed New Testament goes, do you feel that these writers felt compelled or were coerced into writing and therefore deliberately made false statements so as to warn the reader? Just curious to know, because if they were under the Roman authority, they might have. Just curious. Thank you. Bye.
So I hear two questions. I hear the possibility that the writers of the New Testament were, after all, writing somewhere in the Roman Empire, and they did not want to offend the empire. So they no doubt, and they did, write in a way that would exonerate Rome for any culpability for Jesus' crucifixion and hold the Jews uniquely responsible for the execution of Jesus. And I've talked about this quite a bit, and I discuss it in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical, that we can actually trace this by examining the Gospels, more specifically the 4 passion narratives in the Christian Bible. And you could see that as we move from the earliest of the 4 Gospels chronologically, Mark the oldest, and Pontius Pilate is certainly not held accountable. We see that in all the Gospels, the Jews are responsible, but the level of responsibility increases for the Jews. The guilt of the Jews increases exponentially. And conversely, the Pontius Pilate is increasingly exonerated. So there's one example. By the time we get to Matthew, the anti-Semitism in chapter 27, the Passion narrative, the Jews openly state that we take his blood upon ourselves and our children forever, and therefore Jesus should be crucified. And Pontius Pilate wants no part of it, and he washes his hands of it. And in Matthew chapter 27, we're introduced to the wife of Pontius Pilate, who also thinks that Jesus is innocent and has a dream telling her that Rome is about to crucify an innocent man. So she and her husband are both protesting for the innocence of Jesus. By the time we come to the book of John, there's a conversation in chapter 19, and that's the Passion narrative. And there you have Jesus having a very lucid, in-depth conversation with Pontius Pilate. There's no parallel to it. And in it, Jesus engages in a short dissertation with Pontius Pilate, assuring him that he is not guilty of any of this, and it was those who gave me over to you. It is their sins that is greatest. So you can very easily trace the anti-Semitism in the Passion narratives, and of course the Rome is exonerated to the point that if you read the Passion narrative in John, Pontius Pilate gives Jesus over to them, meaning gives them over to the Jews. As many people notice, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's. Here's another example. Rome is exonerated. It should not surprise any viewer that there are sects of the Christian religion, an Ethiopian sect of Christianity, an Orthodox, this is not fringe, that holds that Pontius Pilate himself was a saint. He committed suicide, just part of their tradition. So that's how far it goes. And moreover, you see in Paul's letters that the Roman Empire is there because God wanted it there. And if you rebel against the empire, you're rebelling against God. And therefore, Paul says that you should fully submit to the empire, not for pragmatic reasons, but because God wanted Rome there. And if you rebel against Rome, you're rebelling against God, which is mind-blowing. According to the book of Acts, Paul was a citizen of Rome. I don't know if that's true. Paul doesn't make such a claim in his own letters, but it's very clear that the church is doing everything it can to appease Rome and to hold the Jews uniquely culpable for Jesus' crucifixion. The only book in the Christian Bible that does not support Rome, that is anti-Rome, is the book of Revelation. So 26 of the 27 books are definitely very pro-Roman, for sure. I heard another question in there, which you alluded to the question of whether the authors of the Christian Bible made so many flagrant mistakes that perhaps this was a dog whistle so that Jews would avoid it, which is a very interesting question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I've thought about it a lot. The mistakes that you find everywhere in the Christian Bible, the outrageous mistakes. I mean, the New Testament is riddled with outrageous contradictions. It's not how many women came to the tomb Easter morning. Those are variants. They're not interesting. But the amount of abuse of the Hebrew Bible baked into the New Testament is so outrageous that one could argue, and people have speculated, that the authors of the Christian Bible were writing this under duress and therefore put dog whistles in there so that any person who had any knowledge at all of the Jewish scriptures would stay as far away from it as possible, because the amount of mistakes sometimes can't be explained. It's almost like they were trying to make mistakes at every turn. There's almost nothing that is just smooth. I certainly don't know the answer to that question. I certainly think about that a lot, because there are just too many mistakes that are too outrageous, and some of them seem to be vestigial, completely unnecessary. Before we close, heading back to the earlier idea of the anti-Semitism pro-Roman, you even find more anti-Semitism in later Christian literature that did not make it into the canon, thankfully. Like the Gospel of Peter is even more anti-Semitic. And that's what you expect. The further you go into the 2nd century, the more anti-Semitism, the more vulgar the anti-Semitism is. There are people who speculate that, in fact, Rome concocted Christianity. There are people like that. It's a claim which I think is just enormous. I used to ignore it completely, and now I think about it a lot and take it seriously. The amount of evidence you would need for that would be astounding, but it's absolutely intriguing. Anyways, thank you so much for your question. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא